Hey everyone. So, in this episode, we're going to talk about the multiple bounce roll, also known as the buzz roll. Okay, this is something that is pretty unique in terms of the basic strokes and rudiments in terms of snare drum playing, because it's a very unique skill that takes a unique way of doing it that doesn't apply to most of the other things that you would need to play most of the things on a snare drum or any drum for that matter. So it requires kind of its own explanation. But it's something that is not that difficult to master. It's pretty easy if you just know how to do it. So today we're going to talk about how to play a buzz roll or how to play a multiple bounce roll. So what am I talking about? What is a multiple bounce roll? Basically, your stick is going to come down, and with one motion of your wrist, you're going to have multiple hits of the surface. Basically what it is, right? Like that, right? Every other concept that we've talked about so far is talking about hitting the surface once, right? In different ways with different strokes and different techniques. So this time we're going to hit the drum, and we're going to have many times the stick is going to hit the surface. That is, by definition, multiple bounce roll, right? So how do we achieve that? Basically, you're going to do a little bit of squeezing, primarily at your fulcrum, which is here between these two fingers in the middle and of these two, index and ring finger, and your thumb. That's primarily where the pressure is going to come from. Just like that. And you'll notice as you try to do this and you practice it, you'll notice that different amounts of pressure in your fingers will give you drastically different sounds. So for example, if I squeeze the stick really hard, it doesn't bounce at all, right? So obviously you don't want that. So don't squeeze too much, but you don't want to be so loose that it doesn't have multiple bounces, right? So it's just a little bit of squeeze so that it kind of goes, and it dies. By nature, the first sound is going to be a little bit louder than the last sound. That's okay. Okay, in this one instance, that's okay. But what you need to do at the beginning is just try it. Just try it. Get your sticks and just try it to see what kind of amount of pressure you need in your hands or not need to achieve this sound, right? Now you want the stick to bounce as many times as possible, okay? If you can get it to bounce and stay bouncing for like 10 seconds, you'd be a master of all masters. See, this isn't going nearly, it's like maybe a second and a half. So that's basically what you want to do for a multiple bounce stroke. Now, once you've figured out what the pressure point is to get those multiple bounces, you can start playing with little variances of your pressure and your fulcrum pressure, right? So if I have this much pressure and I have that, if I put a little bit more, it's a little shorter. A little bit more, a little shorter than that. A little less, then it's longer, right? So what we're going for, ideally, is to do that idea with both sticks so that they combine to sound like a roll, right? So they have a sustained, even sound, which sounds like this. Okay, something to that effect. So as you notice, when I did that, when I was playing both hands together, each hand was not bouncing nearly as much or as many times as it did when I did hands together or hands apart. Because this is an exaggeration of the sound and the technique, just to get you to get used to it. Okay? Now there's also going to be a slight difference in your hands depending on if you're doing this in a marching rudimental situation or if you're doing this in a concert situation, meaning concert snare drum. Okay? So for a marching situation, you're gonna want to try to maintain the same technique that we've been talking about from the beginning for everything else in terms of keeping your fingers on the stick, staying relaxed, always staying relaxed, but keeping your fingers on the stick, even though you're only using really these fingers up here. I mean, if you have all your fingers on the stick, this middle finger does become involved also, and you can use that to kind of help out with the fulcrum. Right? I can feel it just as much on my middle finger as I can with my index finger. Okay, so they both should be involved. And the reason you just keep the other fingers kind of on the stick is pretty much for uniformity, right? Because that's one of the big things about marching percussion is uniformity. If you're in a snare line or a tenor line, you all need to look the same. You all need to have them be playing with the same technique and have the exact same approach to the drum. So that's why it's important that your hands all look the same. Okay, so that's why we keep the fingers pretty much on the stick when we're doing buzz roll. Now, if you're in a concert band situation or wind ensemble, wind symphony, symphonic band, orchestra, whatever, and you are the only one playing snare drum and you have a buzz roll, you don't need to worry about that. You don't need to worry about keeping every finger on the stick, even if you're not going to be using these back fingers too much. The important thing in a concert situation is the sound. It's always about the sound. So because of that, there's differences in how you would play buzz rolls and interpret music in a concert situation than in a marching situation. Okay? So just briefly about concert snare drumming, if you're playing in a concert situation and you're playing a buzz roll, you don't have to worry about anything except the sound. You can kind of have your fingers off the stick like this, playing a buzz roll, as long as it sounds good, because that's what you're going for, is a good sound all the time. Okay, so in marching percussion, you also are always looking for the best sound possible, but you have the added responsibility of having the exact same approach as other people. Okay, so that's why usually you want to try to keep your fingers close to being on the stick if you're playing a buzz roll in a marching situation. So all I did was to go from that to this, was I made the strokes a little bit shorter, maybe right there. And you can see the rhythm that my hands are playing, the sticks are playing, is like here, right? That's called my check pattern for my buzz roll. So all you got to do to turn that into a good sounding buzz roll is just have the check pattern go a little faster so that the individual hands meet up quicker. For example, this, if I don't change anything in my fingers, my fulcrum or my approach, I just change the check pattern, I can turn it into this sound. And one of the things you're going to go for once you start practicing putting the hands together like that is to try to get an even sound, right? You don't want to hear the check pattern when you're playing a buzz roll. Like for example, if your buzz roll's here, right? So your check pattern is this. Let's call it 16 notes. 1 E into 2 E into 3. 1 E into 2 E into 3. You're going to de-emphasize a little bit the very beginning of each hand, especially your right hand if you're right-handed, because we tend to put more pressure on the right hand than the left if you're left-handed. If you're left-handed, then it's the opposite. But if you put too much pressure on the first note, you get that. You can really hear the check pattern and the pulse of the buzz roll. And that's not a good sound. You don't want to hear the pulse. You want to hear an even. There you go. Like that. Okay? And if your check pattern is a triplet, same thing. Right? The key is to not squeeze so hard that the stick bounces but doesn't die. You want it to bounce about that much, right? And just relax. Always make sure too, when you're playing a buzz roll, sometimes things get a little weird in terms of our stroke angles. Like we talked about in the very first video about coming down exactly perpendicular to the playing surface. And that's just as important now when you're playing a buzz roll. Because sometimes people, thinking so much about the buzz, they start slicing like this. Just want to be aware that you're always looking at your sticks, looking at the pathway, so that you can always maintain a good relationship angle-wise between your stick and your playing surface. Boom. Now, all this we've done mesh grip, okay? Traditional grip is pretty much the same thing. Your fulcrum is here, so you're doing it a little bit, you're controlling the buzz roll here, just the same place. Your thumb into your index finger, right? Just takes a little bit more practice, but it's the exact same concept. Just make sure that you're always turning your wrist correctly, pivoting like this, exactly in a perfect pivot, not like this or like this, right? But a perfect rotation of the radius and the ulna, just like we talked about. Just like that, okay? Rotate your wrist. Buzz roll. And if you have a sforzando buzz roll or a forte piano buzz roll where you have an accent in the beginning, you just squeeze really hard at the very beginning, give it a little bit of height. The most common application of that is when people do the Star Spangled Banner. The very beginning of the Star Spangled Banner, sometimes people want, directors, composers want a loud accent at the very beginning. So that's how you achieve that. You just give yourself a little bit of height on that and squeeze just a little bit so your stick doesn't go crazy like that. And usually, the last thing I want to say is when you're playing a buzz roll, usually, the music will dictate this, but usually you don't want to accent or bring emphasis to the end of the buzz roll, okay? A buzz roll should be like a sound that happens and then just stops, okay? Wherever it ends, you want it to end. Okay, if you're playing something that has a specific amount of notes with a specific note pattern, like example 16 note, two counts of 16 notes with a release, like 1 E end to 2 E end to 3, try not to put a release there that's noticeable, unless it's written as an accent, and then of course you do that. Now if you find if it's written as, say, a half note, like just a half note with a buzz on it, then your check pattern can be whatever you need it to be if you're in a concert situation. If you're in a marching situation, then obviously you need to decide between everybody in your section so everybody's playing the same check pattern, okay? But in a concert situation, you wouldn't need to match anybody else, so you can just buzz for two counts, and then stop. Doesn't matter which hand you stop at, as long as you stop right on the beat in terms of where the conductor is giving you time. In a marching situation, you need to decide where your check pattern is and decide so everybody ends on the same note. 1 E ended. But the key to playing good multiple bounce rolls is, again, like everything else, don't tighten up, don't get too tense in your fulcrum. Stay relaxed, let the stick bounce, This is one of the freest rudiments in terms of what your sticks can do of all of them, right? So let it happen, but a multiple bounce buzz roll can be just a beautiful, beautiful sound in percussion. And it's something everybody should master and be able to play. See, this pad is pretty unforgiving too, right? It's very short, the sound is very short and very staccato, so you can really hear all the, you can hear a little bit of the pulse, some inconsistencies. So you really got to work to make it sound good. An actual snare drum, a concert snare drum, will probably be a little bit more forgiving in terms of that. Marching snare drum will not. Okay, so practice a lot, play a lot of buzz rolls. Don't get freaked out. It's nothing weird. It's just something else that you need to practice. And once you practice, you'll have it. All good, right? All right, that's multiple bounce rolls. Boom. See you next time.